You know,
Something against me? Do you not like me, Nick?
I feel like you instigate fights quite a bit, but you know, that's
Fights between the fighters?
yeah. I mean, maybe that's your job, but where I come from, you know, people like that get slapped.
All right, so again, we're going to talk about something that happened in the news, or in MMA news this week. So last weekend, Buckley got a really big win against Vicente Luque, which I also called, by the way. One of the very few people who did. I'm just saying. I said Buckley was going to win that fight. And then a few days later, he goes on the MMA Hour to talk about the win. And in the course of that interview, I don't know how it came about. Let's just say the interview got a little bit tense. We'll call it tense.
Yeah.
Now, to summarize for people who didn't see it, Buckley essentially called out Ariel Helwani for being, you know, calculated in the way that he gets fighters to either speak against the UFC or in some cases to phrase leading questions in a way that either get the fighters upset with the company and vice versa. You know, getting the fighters to say things that get them in hot water with the UFC.
Yeah.
I think the term he used was that he weaponizes UFC fighters against the company, which I thought was very apt. So I wanted to know what you thought about this interview. Is Ariel just doing his job, or does Buckley kind of have a point here?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that Ariel, his job has changed. I think that now he is a baiter. He baits people into stories. He creates these situations that are going to be clickbaity, that are going to be attention grabbing, that keep him at the center of the conversation. Not necessarily the story of the fighter, but they keep him at the center of the conversation. And that's a very large difference from what he used to be back in the day when he was primarily a reporter. So I think that Buckley has a strong point on the way that him saying that he weaponizes fighters, not to mention the fact of, you know, obviously his relationship with the UFC is not so great. They clearly hate him and the feeling is mutual. So anytime that he's able to push back on the UFC, like when Francis was doing well, took every opportunity he could to badmouth the UFC and say that Francis, you know, came out on top in that situation. So anytime he has an opportunity to do that, talk about fighter pay, anything negative towards the UFC, he's going to do it. And that goes for when he's having a conversation with fighters. So Buckley's right when it comes to that. But at the same time, he is doing his job. That's his job now. That's what he's parlayed his career into, is being somebody that's more of a WWE heel than an actual reporter. And that's really no shade to him because it's working. It's been beneficial. So if it's working, then keep on doing it. But
Yeah.
that's his job now. That's what he does.
Yeah, so I think you're 100% right about that. And the thing is, for me, like, first and foremost, like, Ariel was, and to some extent is, people forget this often, he's a very good MMA journalist.
He is.
Like, personally, I do think he's fallen off massively, like, for the reasons that I'll sort of summarize at the end. But yeah, he's still a good journalist. You know, he provides a platform for so many fighters that otherwise don't get promoted by the UFC, to give them time in the limelight. And while he does do this for himself as well, you know, there are self-serving reasons for it, it's a reciprocal relationship. And, you know, he does deserve to be commended to that to some extent. You know, the majority of his work, while it is headline grabbing as you said, and it's designed to be that way, I wouldn't deem it most of it. The bulk of it is not controversial. It's just sort of questions that people might want to know the answer to, and he provides that platform. But the one reason I never really liked this guy is that the main part of his shtick is basically being a grade A level shit stirrer. Now, don't get me wrong, shit stirring can be really funny. I've just personally never really liked his Weasley way of going about it. Like, the most famous example that I can recall is, you know, when he had that Nick Diaz question, you know, when he was questioning Nick Diaz about him being late to a press conference, and Dana stepped in and preempted him and said, "You're going to ask this, aren't you?" And then kind of said the question on his behalf. And then it was very obvious that they both wanted to move on, and he just kept pressing him about it and clearly trying to create tension.
Make it.
Just one more question. You said you got in late on Tuesday night. Was it because of
Ariel? He's here.
Okay,
He's here. He's here now.
All right.
You got any questions about the fight?
Obviously, it was a big story.
Yeah, he's here.
We spoke about it.
He's here now.
It's a part of the story.
I understand. Which part of what story?
Of this fight. A lot of people are interested in watching this press conference to see if Nick was going to show up because he wasn't there yesterday. So we would.
He's here today, and I guarantee you he'll
great.
be there tomorrow at the weigh-ins, and I guarantee you he will be there Saturday.
No one's doubting that, but just wanted to get the reason
You
why.
want to antagonize him. You want to aggravate him and get him pissed off.
That absolutely not.
It's totally the truth. That's
Asking
why
a
I
question.
knew what your question was right when I called it, right when you picked up the microphone. You never even ask questions first. You usually hang back and wait. Ooh, you have to get that first question. You knew what you wanted to
God
ask him.
forbid.
You want to piss him off and aggravate him. Would you have any questions about the fight?
Not right now.
Okay.
And that was one that stood out very early on in his career. Now, in the early days, his shit stirring was mostly reserved to create tension and at times instigate beef between fighters. He was very good at kind of getting fighters to beef with each other. And there's countless examples of this. Now, sometimes it was done very tastefully, like he did with Cormier and Miocic. It was more playful. And there was one instance I remember when he bought... Do you remember when he was interviewing Poirier in the lead up to the second Eddie Alvarez fight? And then he brought Eddie Alvarez in the middle of an interview to confront Poirier live on air. Now, I thought this was really weaselly, but it was entertaining. And there was obviously some less so. Like, I didn't like the whole race baiting thing with Dricus and him making it.
Yeah, that wasn't right.
He was the one who instigated the race thing between it. It very much wasn't that tone until Ariel set that agenda. Now, again, I don't really have an issue with this because he not only elevates himself by doing this and creates headlines, again, he's promoting the fights. And we need that as spectators. We need hype. But as we know, and you brought this up as well, he obviously has had very well publicized beef and tension with Dana in the UFC. And since then, there's been a rise in examples of where Helwani seizes every opportunity to either cause tension between the UFC and the fighters, like he did with Poirier when he brought up the pay-per-view points thing. You know, and he's come out in the past and said money's off limits, and then he goes and does it anyway. Or he directly pumps information from the fighters that make the UFC look bad. So he did it with Thompson when he didn't get paid for backing out of the fight with Mikel Pereira. He did it with Ngannou. He did it with the whole Cyborg and Instagram bullshit.
Did you have a chance to talk to Cyborg?
I did not.
Will you unblock her on Instagram? She's bothered by this.
It's fine, yeah.
Bothered by that?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Nothing surprised me. It's fine.
She's bothered by what?
That you blocked her on Instagram. She brought this up today.
What the fuck?
He did it with McGregor. There's endless examples. And so he's always trying to find the opportunity to weaponize someone into bad-mouthing someone he has beef with. And he goes for it with relish. And he has no issues in those instances being either untruthful.
She's bothered by this.
It's fine, yeah.
Or misleading, as long as it makes the UFC look bad in the moment. Now, again, you can argue all this is fine. He's asking questions that usually the public have interest in. But what disgusts me the most about Ariel, and this has also been said by other commentators on the platform, when he's pressed about these weaselly shit-stirring tactics, he acts like he's fucking oblivious to doing it. You know, he goes on like, what do you mean? I'm not the kind of person that does this. You know, it's like, I'm just asking people like questions that people want to know about. I'm doing this all for the fighters. And I can't decide if he's trolling or if he genuinely sees what he's doing as fair game and just as a responsibility as a journalist. He always maintains that he does this for the fighters, but it's very clear lately that his real agenda is sticking it to the UFC above anything else because he doesn't give a shit. if it causes issues for the fighters with their employers. And that's why I hate the smarmy little prick. And I'm going to give a little shout out to the musical MMA channel for that particular retort, because I was talking to him about this the other day, and he used the word smarmy to describe Ariel. And that's what he is. It's why I can't watch him anymore. I just feel that his beef that he has with the UFC is far more important than anything else now. And it's ruining his integrity as a journalist. I think he's a worm. I think he's a hypocrite. I think he's a liar. I think he's relentlessly arrogant and self-righteous. And his self-righteous part about him is the thing I hate about him the most. And while Buckley didn't call him out in the most eloquent way, it was at least successful in bringing this into the light again. Because I think the way that he behaves is fucking disgraceful. And I just think he's an arsehole. Sorry, that was quite the rant.
No, that was a Frankie rant. I think that it's one of the things that I've kind of pointed out in that video that I did, when him and Chael had their beef. That was a great one. I guess you can call it beef when they went back and forth. And it was the reason why I was, that was the reason why, one of the reasons why I kind of slanted towards Chael, even though Chael has his agenda as well. But it's one of the reasons that I slanted towards Chael, because I know what Ariel's agenda is, and it seeps down into everything that he does. And it's turned somebody who was at the top of the profession to somebody who is unrecognizable at this point. That's not the same guy. I mean, he's one of the people that made me even want to do this, and it's just not the same person that I saw at the beginning, and it's unfortunate for sure.
Yeah, and that's the issue that I had with him, because I used to watch the MMA Hour religiously. Like, I've never really liked Ariel as a person, but I've enjoyed his content, and I've respected him as a journalist. But now it just feels like, as we've both said multiple times, his main agenda now just seems to be sticking it to the UFC at every opportunity, and he doesn't care who he hurts in the process. It could be fighters, it could be other journalists, it could be talent agents, manager. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit who he mows down in his path, as long as he gets to stick it to the UFC on a week. You can see he just relishes in it as well. It was like, even the situation with Ngannou, he didn't know that things were going to work out with Ngannou to that extent. That could have blown up in Ngannou's face so badly, and he spent months goading Ngannou into not working with the UFC. Now, the thing is, it did work out in Ngannou's favor, and that's great. But the way the situation was at the time, it was looking like it wasn't going to. Yeah. And he just wanted to use it as an opportunity. He made it seem like it was about Ngannou, but it was more about just, again, sticking it to the UFC to some extent, and he's willing to throw anybody under the bus to do it. It's just something that, like I said, he's not recognizable anymore.
Now, one of the things you can't ever question on him is his courage. I mean, the dude is...
Well, he's become that. You know, because he was called out so much for being a pussy. So he almost puts this bravado on now, and that's another thing that I don't like about him. He is a bitch. He should embrace it. Do you know what I mean? He is. This isn't... He's not a fight. He's a coward. I mean, you remember how when even recently, when they had the... was it the Logan Paul and... I think it was
Dylan Dennis?
The Dylan Dennis one. When he was in the middle with the micro, and as soon as he was instigating the entire time, and as soon as things kick off, you just see him worm his way out. Like, he's such a weasel, that guy. Just embrace it though.
I wonder if he was like that in school. Like,
oh, he was. Instigating fights. You know he's been doing this his whole life. He was that guy in school that instigate, oh, he said this about you, and then going over to the other side and doing the same thing, and then just sitting back and watching them fight. He's that guy.
Yeah.
He's a seasoned pro at starting beef. And I just find it, right. Like I said, sometimes it's funny, but it's just, I just think the guy's a worm. And what I hate about him the most is when he goes on like, what do you mean? I don't do this. I just care about, that's what pisses me off about him the most. That he doesn't own it. He doesn't say, this is what I'm doing. Fuck it. Do you know what I mean? It's the I would never do that. I just care about the fighters. Nah, man, you're a snake.
Yeah, it messes me up that under all that is a great journalist.
And that is forgotten.
Is in there.
That's why I felt like it was necessary to give him his credit at the beginning, because he is very good he's a fucking smart guy, but he's also a snake.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed he hasn't been slapped, to be honest.
That is very surprising.
Like, Mayhem Miller came close to knocking his block off. Like, I thought that was the moment we were going to get it. But I'm amazed someone hasn't slapped him up. It will happen eventually.
I'm sure it's coming.
Oh, it's coming.
I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah. Perfect way to end that segment.
Where I come from, you know, people like that get slapped.